Before I want to talk about active imagination and shamanic journeying, I feel like I want to clarify something, paraphrasing a quote by Terence McKenna from The Invisible Landscape. The shaman is able to act as an intermediary between the society and the supernatural, or to put it in Jungian terms, he is an intermediary to the collective unconscious. Through the office of the shaman, the society at large is brought into close and frequent encounter with the numerous archetypal symbols of the collective unconscious. These symbols retain their numinosity, immediacy, and reality for the society through their constant reaffirmation in shamanic ritual and through the shaman's narration of mythical scenarios and his artistic production. The shaman is the connection in the present epoch to the past mythological age. In his ecstasy, the shaman re-enters that mythical condition that existed before and thus reasserts for the entire culture the reality of that mythical time. Thus, the validity of the archetypal motifs is reaffirmed. In that sense, these mythological stories are not just stories about archetypes, but also stories about instincts and emotion. In that sense, these stories are symbolic coded means of talking about them, containing rich symbolism, and also creates means of communication. As the labels used when it comes to the gods, spirits, and other beings, and make it clear to those such as the shaman what the person is dealing with. The shaman can hence then do the appropriate rituals for healing. Understanding the symbols and what they stand in for is thus not only key to understanding the language of the subconscious for ourselves, but also is of great importance for the culture at large. So yeah, maybe a little bit of an introduction first for this video, but yes, I had been thinking about making a video on shamanic journeying and active imagination, and really to get into it, maybe highlight some differences, and then dive deeper into a real world example using myself as an example, really. So I'll start off with active imagination, then talk a bit about shamanic journeying, just a bit like what the differences are, and just dive straight into it. So what is active imagination? Well, active imagination is a method that Carl Jung used in his exploration of his subconscious, which led to, for instance, the Red Book. Active imagination is a process in Jungian psychology used to bridge the gap between the conscious and unconscious mind, to facilitate communication between both. So then also, there's also a reason why Jungian psychology places a heavy emphasis on dream interpretation and the contents of the unconscious mind, especially dream interpretation, because this is also this communication between both. But now coming back to active imagination, where what is this about? So during the process of active imagination, Jungian analysts encourage clients to translate the contents of dreams without adding any analysis from the conscious mind. So Carl Jung argued that dreams and other unconscious images can be particularly vivid when these images attempt to make their way to the conscious mind. Through the process of active imagination, these images may become less vivid and allow the contents of the unconscious mind to healthily integrate with the conscious mind. Jung, however, cautioned that the process of active imagination had to be done carefully because it could cause a disconnect with reality. And there's a reason for it, because it brings you, closer to the subconscious, yes. And that you have that connection going on and you go deeper into it, into this symbolic realm. But, and that's kind of to bring Alan Watts into this, is that the symbolic realm that you interact with is not the real world. It's a concept. Similarly with what we're doing here with Jung, it's a concept to interface with the symbols that are coming from the part of us that makes these symbols, and that's how we can communicate with the subconscious. And the thing is that we're interacting with it, but we should not confuse the symbol for the thing in of itself, or the symbol for reality, because then we're starting to lose ourselves in the symbols, and then we drift off. We go ooh, and we go somewhere into fantasyland, and then we can easily become detached, like Peter Pan going off into Neverland, and then it's just like, okay, bye bye Peter, there you're going, and then you're gone. So you need to be, in that sense, really grounded in this physical space with other people to be able to do this thing. Coming to active imagination itself, like, so how does it work? So active imagination is intended to bring about a state in between sleep and wakefulness, where people may be partially aware that they are dreaming. Jung argued that active imagination can be achieved naturally during intense states of relaxation, such as when listening to a story or drifting off to sleep. I would myself recommend complementing this with breath work, because it really, well, helps to bring oneself into such a state of relaxation to begin with. Because often we're really, well, stressed or tense about something, and that's just not as easy to really get into that kind of state of mind. And when it comes to active imagination, in dreams, you dialogue with your parts passively while you sleep. In active imagination, in contrast, it requires your conscious participation, meaning you have to be actually active in some sense, in participating in it without forcing a narrative to flow. You're not forcing a certain narrative or anything on it. You have to interact with it as if it's a real thing happening, and you just let it unfold like how it wants to unfold. Here, you dialogue with parts of your unconscious in your imagination. Jung prescribed active imagination for people overwhelmed with too many dream images. Jungians also use it to support dream work. Active imagination is distinct from fantasy, meaning that the images encountered in active imagination have a life of their own, and that the symbolic events develop according to their own logic. And that's again like the pointing out that you need to let it flow and not try to make it a certain way or have a certain narrative in mind. This is what's going to happen. So these things pop up, because if you don't do it and you go with presuppositions into it, then this distorts the image, and you end up creating a false fantasy landscape instead, meaning you're not gonna get the meaning. You distort it into something what it's not, and then it doesn't actually tell you or like not in a clear way what it's actually about, and you're not gonna as easily get the message as if you would just not go in there with a particular idea of how it's supposed to look like, or anything of other weird ideas about what's exactly going on. You have to, in that sense, drop those things before you go into it. And and in that sense, I kind of already did, but I really do feel that I should bring a warning when it comes to active imagination. As also Jung to Live By pointed out, that it's okay for self-exploration if you're relatively stable. But if you're unstable and you start to do active imagination, you're going to create problems for yourself. And the thing is that when you start interacting with the subconscious, then and you have this interaction going on, and you're stable, fine. Things might come up. Um, you might go through some stuff, but overall, you're grounded in reality, and everything is just like nice and solid, and and you're not gonna drift off. If you're unstable, you can drift off in really weird ways, or things come up and you just become completely overwhelmed. Similarly with shamanic journeying, if you go in too deep straight away, you'll end up in a whole boatload of trouble. That's why you need to take these things carefully. So being well grounded is in a sense key in being able to deal with the images that come up. The big thing with it also is to be able to realize what the image is and what it really is trying to tell. Because it is really easy to get lost within the image, and this then can create all kinds of fantasies and can lead you really away from reality and what truly matters, which is the unfolding of the self, or how Jung to Live By would say, the Geno. So now coming then to shamanic journeying. There's first of all a big difference with active imagination. The biggest being that the journey itself is set up differently. You approach it entirely differently. Meaning that there's normally a specific cultural and mythological structure to it. You work with certain spirits that you have met when you initially entered the first time, without knowing what to expect. Then over time building up a relationship with the spirits, where later on you actually slowly start to dig deeper within the subconscious. The spirits, well, that I'm talking about here in Jungian terms, because to really I guess put it in a more Buddhist everything is mind perspective, so I can't really compare these the two different approaches. But partly archetypes, but also linked to complexes and different instincts and drives we have, and it really mixture of both. Even it's it depends. It really depends on what it is. But definitely, archetypes. You could say yes, some have such forms. Even though to be honest, for most shamans, they would be no, these are spirits. And I do think there's kind of a benefit to it, in at least acknowledging that what you're interacting with is kind of conscious outside of you, even though you shouldn't be completely. I don't know. You should still be aware that to a degree that what you're interacting with is kind of part of you as well. That it's not so that you don't lose track of that, what kind of you can translate it kind of back into that sense of something that's about you and your life when you're going in there, even though there's other aspects of shamanic journeying outside of this kind of self-focused work too. That's more in a cultural sense, like what I pointed out in the beginning of the video, and also this for the community at large. So there's other dynamics going on there than just yourself by your lonesome. But I'm gonna compare active imagination and shamanic journeying from my perspective of having done those things alone by myself. And when it comes to the spirits I talked about in the shamanic sense, these are all spirits and deities that one encounters. And then, kind of through interacting with them through this mythological lens, it then creates such a type of image that gets co-created between you consciously and the mythological structure that is being used within the shamanic tradition one follows and the unconscious. So it kind of forces this particular, let's say, mask upon different things within the subconscious, because it's how you know about these different drives and spirits and forces. And in that sense, I found it personally easier for me to approach things from this shamanic journeying perspective than the active imagination one. And, it's really also linked through my understanding of these myths that I kind of tend to spot quicker what is what, and like, oh wait, this is this thing, that's that thing, and then I'm like, okay, and that's links to the Jungian lens in this way. So there's these archetypes, these things, these complexes going on here, and then I'm actually able to see what's going on from like two perspectives, which kind of helps me in that sense to understand it in a broader sense, I would say. And to also like really say, I found it that, well, for me, shamanic drumming is an easier means of getting into the proper state for doing it. So it's in that sense more beneficial. Well, but then also now to both active imagination and shamanic journeying once again, there are real dangers involved. As, for instance, also Nick from Three World Shamanism would say, using the example of a beach, if you're just going to stand at the beach or dip your toe in the water, there is nothing dangerous about that. Yeah, and like I said, if you go straight into the deep end, then this is going to overwhelm you and become dangerous, because you have no fucking idea what's up and what's down, what's going on, and you'll be completely overwhelmed. And you kind of messing with things that you know nothing about, or like you don't know anything. You have to like approach it slowly, work with the spirits, get to know them, and then expand slowly from there, and then just build the whole thing up. In that sense, it would be with regards to active imagination, akin to dealing with more, surface level unconscious stuff, getting to know how Jung to live by would say self-concept and identified complexes and aligned complexes. But, I'll get later into more of that. In a shamanic lens, this would be one exploring and getting to know the helper spirits, and what in core shamanism is often seen as the forest realm, where you meet your power animals. And if you stay in this kind of realm and you just go in like the top layer basically, and you stick to that, yeah, not much gonna happen. If you go in way deeper, it's, yes, you're gonna encounter, how they would say, you'll encounter the nasties, and they're very much dangerous, and one needs the proper help and protection to and know how to deal with these things, because you can royally screw yourself up as well. And when it comes to journeying, the journeying itself takes place with, for instance, a shamanic drum. which takes one into a trance-like state. Well, we visit the three worlds, even though it's not the case in all shamanic traditions, but I personally use it. And, which in a Jungian lens, you could be like, yeah, these are some different layers of the unconscious. Fair. Which segues straight into, well, kind of this next part about the psychosystems analysis chart. This has been made by Stephen T. Richards and Pauline A. Richards from Jung to Live By to explain, in Jungian and in a psychological sense, what we're working with. And I'm using their system because I found it kind of handy to use to kind of know, like, well, what kind of level are we working at, and like how deep is this actually going? Like, what am I actually working with? So, well, then looking at this psychodynamic systems hierarchy, at the top we're seeing the persona, and that's Carl Jung's idea of our social mask, basically. And this social mask is co-created by ourselves and others. Then below on the diagram, there's the immediate consciousness, with below that the aligned complexes. This is in the unconscious, the aligned complexes. These are the ones that we are aware of, but we don't identify with, because they might be, like how Jung to Live By said in their video, unpleasant and attached to previous learning, or to tasks we don't like doing, or things that that we feel that we're not competent at. So things that are like, yeah, we're aware of them, we know about these things, but it's like, deeper down, then we have the non-aligned complexes, which are effectively completely unconscious. However, they have a consciousness of their own, as how Steve Richards points out, every level of this stack has a consciousness of its own. And below that, you have the resultant images, which Jungians call an archetypal image. And Steve Richards here in the video from which this is, points out that it is just an image and not the archetype itself. These images are co-created through our own experience and the unconscious, and it's kind of what I pointed out with the mythological context of the shamanic journeying as well, that these are co-created. It's the mask that they wear, and the archetype itself is the force behind it. And the layer below that is the deep structure complexes. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about more about now, through the example of a specific journey that I did at that depth. But before that, the two Jungian analysts described the deep structure complex as a system of caves, much akin to where I was working, going to the very source of what was ailing me. In my case, because it was done through shamanic journeying, it was the guardian spirit which allowed it to be possible for me, ego consciousness, to travel there. In the Jung to Live By video, they also state that one needs to create a vessel for the ego consciousness to get there. But now to the journey itself. So, as it is a shamanic journey, I was drumming till I reached the trance state. I was then in a place that looked like a desert, but it was very vast, and it was filled with ash. And then there were in the distance, there were like grayish rocks, and a path going like downward towards it. And there's an entrance, like, with something that looked like cliffs, and then there were like caverns going into it, like into like a cavern system. which also had ash on the ground. Then, when I was approaching the when I was approaching these cliffs close by, there was a big dead tree. It was like black, grayish in color, and no leaves. It's dead, and with roots. It's quite a big tree as well. And then the first being that I saw was a bear standing on its legs. It had no eyes, antlers on its head, and long arms, with kind of like razor claws. They were like Wolverine claws, but more like curved and not so long. And that one started attacking me at first, and at that point, really, I kind of had like that fear started to like creep up, and I could really start to feel a sense of fear, but also stress coming, because it started to stress me out a bit, the entire encounter. Because that's the way how I can tell when I'm starting to get stressed, like how my left ear starts to act up, and that started to happen, and I started to feel very like, I don't know, sweaty, and I could just, I don't know, feel this immense fear. And I was like trying to hide under the roots of the big tree, and it just started attacking me, and it's trying to get at me, and then suddenly it stopped, because this big, muscular, dark figure approached, that had big paws, a necklace of skulls, tusks in his mouth, and horns. At first, I was like, I knew nothing about that. Like, what is this? Like, about this figure. But later, it was confirmed to me by shamans I talked to that it's a form of a deity called Bhairava, a wrathful manifestation of Shiva. And I have to say that by being in the group, I had come across this figure like many months earlier. So it was something that I had picked up on. So it didn't come completely out of nowhere, but kind of very surprised in the moment, at least. I was like, wait, what? But the bear calmed down. So that was nice. So I started to be a little bit less fearful, but still, yeah, very much two fucking frightening figures. They were really like, yeah, I wasn't feeling, too happy about that. Even though the bear stopped attacking me, what I was interacting with, then I just could see this. So the Bhairava figure, he was looking at me, and then he was just looking at me, and then I just knew. He didn't say anything, but I just knew that he wanted me to dance with both of them, and I needed to dance first and sing to them. And then by doing that, and then they were ready to actually guide me further. That was what they wanted, so it was like fair. So, well, then we went further through this ashen desert till we then reached this cavern-like system. We went then past these like really what looked like cliffs, and then we went down into this cavern system. And then both of them entered first. So the opening was quite big. These figures were quite big too. So we were going in there, and then there were like openings on top. So it wasn't like a closed cave, but there were like openings on top where ash was like flowing over the edge down. And in the first chamber like that, there was also filled with ash. and there was a little baby lying in the middle crying. But then, we just moved past the little baby. We just moved past it, and then we were in the next chamber. And in that one, I had seen the first thing that really like jumped out to me was one-eyed giant with a club that was angrily swinging it around. It was naked, had short black hair, and it was just angrily shaking it around against the cave wall. It was just like, "Rrr!" and just hitting the cave wall like boom, 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 and then the floor, "Rrr!" and it was just very, yeah, kind of weird, terrifying figure, but really occupied with itself in the club, hitting the wall and different stuff. So it didn't really. So we just moved further, and then in the same room, just a bit further in, there then was this old-looking witch. She had like brown mud-covered hair. It was really like grayish, darky, yeah, dark grayish, and her clothes were made from hairs too, from her hairs. How it looked like. And then there's further in the room there was a cauldron, and then I had seen her grabbing the legs and arms of babies, and she was chewing on them, and she was just, I don't know, just this hideous being. She was just going there to me, and I could actually just feel like she wanted to grasp at me and be like, I don't know, like eat the flesh from my body. I don't know, I was just like, was there, and I sensed her there, or like she's just there and she's grasping and going like, I will eat you too. But then luckily the bear tore her apart. Because I was kind of getting a bit like, ooh, now this is getting dangerous. There's really just the angry cyclops in the space. We just were like, okay, well, that should be. We just go into the next room. In this next chamber, space was like a darker chamber, lesser hole, less big. It's still like falling ash in from the top over the edge. It's like falling there, and then more like into the middle of the space where then there was this like little naked and bald boy there, just grayish skin. All the ash was all over him, and he was just there sitting there in the center, like he was eating ash and just, I don't know, making like very like golem like movements, and it's going just like, I don't know, moving there around in the center, going like in eating ash. And then there were all over the walls there were scratch marks, because you could see like the marks of like nails going all over the wall. So, well, then looking at what it means in Jungian in psychological terms, like how I said I would talk about it. So, the ash desert with the caves and cliffs filled with ash. Well, here, instead of Jungian in psychological terms, I want to bring in some Buddhism, because it's a channel ground, liminal place where all of this happened. And within Buddhism, these are considered to be one of the deeper realms. And in psychological terms, then you can say, like I said earlier, this place is basically a representation of the deep structure complexes. The first being Ahmed, the bear that had no eyes, endless on its head, and long arms with, like, the razor claws and it all. And in Jungian terms, when it comes to this bear spirit, I would connect it to Eros, and in psychological terms, instincts, or a representation of them in some form. And in that sense, also with then the bear being blind, because that's something that I I wasn't really aware of that. It was like, the bear is blind. Whatever. Didn't really think much of it. But later on, when I was just like, wait, but the bear is blind. Why is the bear blind? Then I realized later on, like, Jung's anima was blind. It means it's underdeveloped. And then I learned, like, so that's what that means. So it meant my underdeveloped instincts. Which kind of makes sense. And also, in that sense, like the eros, like in some sense, the aggressive side too. Because I used to be really way too agreeable. What becomes, however, more interesting is the second spirit, which is actually seen as a deity. And this is Kala Bhairava, a wrathful manifestation of Shiva. And he is a charnel ground deity and lord of the underworld. And you can see him as the wrathful manifestation of the Jungian self. The bear spirit calming down and behaving itself makes sense, as in that the wrathful side of the self was there to assist me as well. The dance I then did was to show my respect to both the bear spirit and Kala Bhairava. And this dance plus some singing was my offering to them that they had requested. I want to also point out that Kala Bhairava, which is an aspect of Shiva, is not only the lord of the underworld, and also has a dog as his companion. I might want to add, even though he did not have one in the journey that I had. Often tends to have. But from a book I read about him, it became clear that there are definite links to Dionysus as well, and a shared goal being liberation. A quote from this book says, Bhairava is Shiva at his most terrifying, at his most fearful. He may be understood as a particular manifestation or emanation of Shiva, or as Shiva displaying himself at a very high level. In some myths, Shiva created Bhairava as an extension of himself, in order to chastise Brahma. So Bhairava is the embodiment of fear, and it is said that those who meet him must confront the source of their own fears, it further says in the book. And his name describes the effect he has upon those who behold him, as it derives from the word bihu, which means to become fearful, of feeling great fear. It further reads, Bhairava is one of those paradoxical figures of Indian myth. He has broken all fetters. He has severed one of the heads of the creator that was lusting after his mind-born daughter, killed the doorkeeper of Vishnu. He dances naked, accompanied by women, and he appears as a figure of horror and ecstasy. Bhairava, Shiva breaks all boundaries and conventions precisely because he is beyond them. Stella Kremrich notes that not all who behold Shiva as a supreme beggar see him in quite the same way. He reveals to his devotee his bhakta in the shape and extent to which they are ready to experience him. The forest myth is central to unraveling the mysteries of Shiva Bhairava. Danliu uses this myth cycle to draw our attention to the similarity of Shiva's primordial cult and the Dionysian mysteries of ancient Greece. End of quotes. And then saying about this forest myth, it's about how Kala Bhairava goes into the forest to test a group of sages who practice extreme austerities and conventional rituals for their own sake. He kind of then reminds them of their final goal by appearing in this form which is beyond all feathers. It's to remind them of, dudes, you're getting lost in fantasy and in convention and doing this thing for the sake of doing it. And it's like, but dude, there's more to this than just doing it for the sake of doing it. There is a goal. So now coming back to the journey, the first chamber filled with ash and a little baby lying in the middle crying. In that sense, for me personally, that's connected to past feelings of neglect, where in the second chamber, the one-eyed giant with a club is connected to the father complex, and also one of the reasons of me repressing my instincts in the first place, which is why the bear is blind. The old-looking witch with brown mud-covered hair and clothes made from hairs that was chewing on the legs and arms of babies, or boiling babies in a cauldron, a representation of the negative mother complex. Where I later then, in another drumming journey, I try to connect with the positive side of both of them. But coming now back to the old witch, there's something from a shamanic sense also which is interesting about it, which is, she wanted to eat flesh from my body while I was alive. And in a shamanic sense, that's connected to a flesh-eating spirit. And I just want to bring that up because I find it fascinating. It's called the Rakshasa. And they are such a kind of malignant spirit that eats human flesh. At times, they refer to the unruly and untamed expression of ignorance and disturbing emotions. They are often depicted to be man-eaters, acting as embodiments of the powers of evil in the Vedic scriptures. The female form is called Rakshasi. As to the mother and father complex, I recommend listening to this video by Jung to Live By, popping up here now on the top of the video. And then finally to the Ashen Boy. Well, this was the aspect I was dealing with that needed to be taken back up. It was distrustful of me, however, and I needed the help of an inner aspect of myself to build up enough trust so it would want to come back up. But once I actually went through this and really decided and put my mind to, like, yes, I'm just gonna go through it. I'm fucking done with these cycles. And I started to really become more active and really proactive with regards to the relationship I built with the subconscious. And then, I had this new search coming up, something new. And this is a search of instinct, really, that started to bubble up. Steve Richards mentioned in the video later on, where, the one which goes about the hierarchical system that they use of the persona on top and with the deep complex and the resultant image above. Later on, he also talked about, well, the meta instincts. And he mentioned there that they can erupt spontaneously, like a flash of information that can be the appearance of a memory, but it isn't a memory, it is an archaic image. This coming up means that the solution to what you're going through has been experienced before and is latent within oneself. When you align well to this, then this creates feelings of meaning. Then it can unpack within the ego and update our core position so we can move on with our lives. So in my own case, this is connected to the Koryos and the Divine Twins. The latter had been calling me for the last 40 years, and I just didn't know. I was just obsessed about it, but really never understood it to the depth of what does this mean, and put the puzzle pieces together. Because I was like, huh. But now coming to it, because I have managed to put it together, and I'm gonna share it with you as well, because I kind of feel like this needs to be shared, even though this is still part of shamanic journey versus active imagination. Yeah, it is. Because what comes after is important too, to really realize that. Because yes, there's the big difference with regards to this. And in that sense, when it comes to both shamanic journeying and active imagination, it's like, yes, there's this interacting going on there, but then there are the differences in the structure, really, like how that lays out. But what also is important is to understand that with both shamanic journeying and the active imagination, and something needs to be done with it. You need to be active with regards to that. And then once something comes up, like this thing guarding the divine twins, the Koryos, something needs to be actually done. It's a call to action, particular action. It's like, well, this is how it used to be done. So, and in that sense, it then is kind of a way of saying, like, yeah, so something like this needs to happen. These things are linked to deeper, more ancient rituals and other things, and they actually have kind of a message in of itself because they have a specific purpose. But yeah, Koryos. The Koryos, or war party, really, what it means, refers to the Proto-Indo-European brotherhood of warriors in which unmarried young men served for several years as a rite of passage that would lead them towards manhood before their full integration into society. The warbands consisted of shape-shifting young warriors wearing animal skins to assume the nature of wolves or dogs. In Europe, those oath-bound In Europe, those oath-bound initiatory warbands were eventually absorbed by increasingly powerful patrons and kings during the Iron Age, eventually making way to actual armies. But the rites of passage idea still lived on in some form. When it now then comes to the divine twins, there's one big thing that keeps coming up, which is with Romulus and Remus, Artemis and Apollo and different twins, really a connection to bears and wolves. They are all linked to the old wolf-bear shamanism that was practiced by the Indo-Europeans, which is a direct link to the Koryos. Some of the young men in the Koryos also being founders of cities and places. Odin also being linked to this. There is, however, a more interesting explanation to this as well, as to what they represent more than that. Joseph L. Henderson in Man and His Symbols says, though the twins are said to be the sons of the sun, they are essentially human and together constitute a single person. Originally united in the mother's womb, they were forced apart at birth, yet they belong together, and it is necessary, though exceedingly difficult to reunite them. In these two children we see the two sides of man's nature. End of quote. It represents in that sense the split between our conscious and unconscious self, where the unison is the self, where the tension has been resolved. In Man and His Symbols, it is further written that there are four stages when it comes to the divine twins and the hero's myth. The first stage can be represented by the carefree play of children. The second stage in the evolution of the hero is the founder of human culture. Between the first and second stage, you have the Koryos and the divine twins that represent the beginning of the transition from childhood to adulthood. When one when one becomes part of the Koryos, or when it came to the girls with Artemis, to bring that in, the twin sister of Apollo, one being associated with bears and the other with wolves, Young girls danced for Artemis, in some places playing the role of animals, often imitating she-bears. This initiation ritual for girls was called the Brauronia, after the location of Artemis' shrine at Brauron, where the ritual performed by girls before they reached puberty took place. Artemis was worshipped as the great she-bear, and the girls who were required to undergo a period of ritual wildness before puberty wore her images, the Arctoi, and often wore bear masks in rituals. This is what the This is what both the Koryos for the boys and the Baronia for the girls represented: a period of ritual wildness before puberty, where the goal was to break free from the parental complexes and to reconnect to instinct in psychological Jungian terms. This, however, does not move one past the hero archetype. It only allows one to move from the first stage to the second, which is connected to culture and community. The hero then in the first stage is a powerful man-god, which is the onset of ego inflation, and finally, in the fourth stage, the twins often misuse their power and fall due to pride and hubris. Joseph L. Henderson in Man and His Symbols further says, "We saw in the myth of the twins how their hubris, expressing excessive ego self-separation, was corrected by their own fear of the consequences, which forced them back into a harmonious ego-self relation. In tribal societies, it is the initiation rite that most effectively solves this problem. The ritual takes the novice back to the deepest level of original ego self-identity, thus forcing him to experience a symbolic death. In other words, his identity is temporarily dismembered or dissolved in the collective unconscious. From this state, he is then ceremonially rescued by the rite of the new birth. This is the first act of true consolidation of the ego with the larger group, expressed as totem, clan, or tribe, or all three combined." There is another ritual which is connected to this aspect of initiation, in which the young men dress up as their ancestors and roam through the village, where they become Odin's wild hunt. Odin sometimes appears as a leader of the wild hunt, a ghostly procession of the dead through the winter sky in winter. I'm gonna bring in here some interesting facts. The dark winter sky being a representation of the underworld, and with it the unconscious. Within this ritual, the young men who have returned from the Koryos die, only to be reborn later as a man that has been integrated into society. The boyhood ego ritualistically dies, is taken apart to be dissolved, like Joseph L. Henderson said, in the collective unconscious, to be reborn again, where they become a full man that is part of the tribe and community. This then resolves the issues represented by the divine twin myth and puts the ego and self back into a harmonious relationship again, which is not dominated by the parental complexes nor the Adlerian complexes, being the inferiority and superiority complex. In that sense, kind of what I discovered through all of this is kind of already what Jung to Live By knew, which is first comes Freud, then comes Adler, and then comes Jung. Instincts first, then social integration, and then individuation. We first have to become the wolf man or bear woman before we can then become part of society as adults, actually come into that proper relationship between ego and self, and relate to others in a grander scope, so it doesn't become just about, well, I guess, us. And then the connection to the self, to really like make it deeper. I do hope that with this video, it would make some things more clear, for one, and that, well, you enjoyed it as well. I would say maybe see you next time. Okay, bye bye.